September 1939. Europe erupts into war. Across the airfields of southern England, RAF Tangmere, RAF Biggin Hill, RAF Hornchurch, the roar of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines shakes the morning fog. Pilots of No. 54 Squadron, No. 92 Squadron, and No. 610 Squadron scramble repeatedly as the Luftwaffe probes British defenses with growing aggression. The Spitfire, sleek, fast and agile, quickly becomes the pride of fighter command. Yet within its elegant curves hides a deadly weakness. By May 1940, during the Battle of France, Spitfire and Hurricane pilots begin reporting the same terrifying moment. When they push their aircraft into a steep dive to pursue a Bf-109, the engine suddenly cuts out. Fuel starvation. A choking Merlin. A plunging aircraft. And at 20,000 feet, with Messerschmitts diving in behind them, a few seconds of engine silence is the difference between life and death. What pilots don't yet know is that one woman, an overlooked engineer working far from the front lines, will soon uncover the root of the problem. And the solution she proposes, a tiny near-worthless steel washer, will change the course of the air war. But on this day in the spring of 1940, the pressure on the RAF is mounting. German fighter groups such as JG-26 and JG-51 tighten the noose. The Battle of Britain is approaching. And unless someone finds a way to fix the Spitfire's catastrophic fuel flow issue, Britain's frontline pilots will pay the price. Little did they know, the answer was already in the hands of a brilliant, quiet, and determined woman whose name history almost forgot. The story begins not in a hangar or on a battlefield, but in the meticulous, cluttered workshops of the Supermarine Aviation Works in Southampton, England. Here, engineers and mechanics labored tirelessly to refine every bolt, every rivet, every moving part of the Spitfire. Among them was Beatrice B. Wallace, a young, unassuming engineer who had joined Supermarine in 1937, just as tensions in Europe were rising. She was one of the few women working on frontline aircraft engineering, tasked with quality control in the notoriously exacting Merlin engine assembly lines. By early 1940, the Battle of France had begun, and the RAF's fighter squadrons were stretched thin. Spitfires were now flying combat sorties almost daily. Pilots from No. 92 Squadron, led by squadron leader Biggin, reported repeated engine failures and high-speed dives, maneuvers they needed to evade or pursue the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-109s. These reports were alarming. At 15,000 feet, pilots described engines cutting out mid-dive, leaving them helpless against enemy fire. Many thought it was pilot error, while others feared a design flaw in the Merlin engine. B had noticed the pattern in the maintenance reports. Pilots were not exaggerating. Engines stuttered and sputtered precisely when fuel pressure dropped during extreme dives. The problem lay in a tiny part of the engine's fuel metering system, which was difficult to access and even harder to fix. Engineers had inspected every possible component, fuel pumps, injectors and regulators, but nothing explained the consistent failures. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe's JG-51 Mulder's Gruppe was dominating the skies over northern France. Their Bf-109s were fast, heavily armed, and aggressive. RAF pilots were dying at an alarming rate. By May 15, RAF Fighter Command reported over 200 aircraft losses in a single week. Commanders were desperate. Morale among pilots was beginning to falter. It was into this tension-filled environment that B quietly proposed a radical idea. The solution, she argued, was insignificant in size, but crucial in function. A small metal washer designed to ensure consistent fuel flow under negative G-forces. A washer that cost the equivalent of 50 pence, almost nothing in the massive war budget, but if installed correctly, it could prevent Merlin engines from cutting out during dives. Her colleagues were skeptical. Some dismissed her suggestion as too simple, even trivial. Yet B persisted, running tests in the workshop's engine rigs and recording data with meticulous precision. By June 1940, with the Luftwaffe preparing to launch Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, her findings were submitted to Supermarine's chief engineers. The stakes could not have been higher. Every day the RAF went into combat with the faulty engine, more pilots were lost, more planes destroyed, and Britain's survival hung in the balance. And all the while, no one imagined that a single tiny piece of metal, essentially a washer, would become the linchpin in a desperate struggle to defend the nation. The stage was set. Spitfires, pilots, and engineers were about to confront one of the most perilous chapters of the Battle of Britain. The question remained, would a 50-cent washer really make the difference between life and death in the skies over England? By mid-July 1940, the skies over southern England were alive with the droning engines of fighter aircraft. The Luftwaffe had begun Adler-Tag, the Eagle Day offensive, aiming to destroy the RAF on the ground and gain air superiority in preparation for Operation Sea Lion. Over the English Channel, formations of Bf-109E fighters escorted Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17 bombers, their dark silhouettes cutting through the clouds like predators on the hunt. RAF pilots, many barely out of training, were being thrown into a relentless storm of combat. No. 92 Squadron, stationed at Biggin Hill, reported daily encounters with Messerschmitt squadrons numbering 12 to 16 aircraft at a time. Spitfires climbed to meet them, engines roaring, guns primed. But a deadly threat lurked not just in enemy fire, but in the Spitfires themselves. Pilots described the terrifying moments during dives. The engine just stops. You feel the nose drop and you're helpless. There's nothing you can do but pray, said Pilot Officer James Harrington, one of the squadron's youngest flyers. The Merlin engine's fuel flow problem was invisible to the untrained eye, yet fatal in execution. And with Bf-109s diving from above at 400 miles per hour, a momentary stutter could cost a life. By 1400 hours on July 15th, the airfield at Biggin Hill was a hive of chaos. Flight controllers scrambled pilots in waves. Mechanics raced to repair aircraft, their faces streaked with grease and sweat. On the briefing room chalkboard, intelligence officers scrawled Luftwaffe movements. JG-26 Schlagiter, Grupp reported moving south from France. Numbers were growing. Over 200 enemy fighters and bombers were expected to attack the southeast coast. Meanwhile, B. Wallace continued her quiet work in the supermarine workshops. She meticulously fitted washers into spare Merlin engines, monitoring fuel pressures under simulated negative G conditions. Little did anyone know this small modification would soon face its first real-world test under the most brutal conditions imaginable. By 1500 hours, radar picked up incoming formations over Dover. The RAF scrambled multiple squadrons, Spitfires and Hurricanes alike. Pilots took off into a sky heavy with heat, haze and smoke from coastal defenses. Clouds scudded across the sun, creating fleeting moments of shadow and light that disoriented even the most experienced flyers. Within minutes, No. 610 Squadron encountered a flight of 12 Bf-109Es. Dogfights erupted. The Spitfire's superior maneuverability was immediately put to the test. But as some pilots dived aggressively to pursue their German opponents, engine stutters began. One pilot, Flying Officer Albert Bert May, felt his Merlin hesitate mid-dive. It was like the aircraft had a mind of its own. I pushed the nose down to catch him, and the engine just died. I was screaming, twisting the throttle, trying everything. I thought it was the end. 2 Bf-109s swooped past him. Tracers cut the air, the deafening roar of enemy guns punctuating the sky. Miraculously, May recovered, managing to level off before crashing into the English Channel, but his heart pounded with terror. Similar stories flooded in from squadrons across southern England. Engineers and officers realized that the fuel starvation problem was systemic, not isolated. Flight commanders began issuing desperate instructions. Avoid steep dives, restrict negative G maneuvers, fly more conservatively. But this hampered combat effectiveness. Every tactical advantage the Spitfire offered was being undermined by a microscopic flaw. The Luftwaffe, sensing vulnerability, pressed the attack. By 1600 hours, formations of over 250 German aircraft converged over Kent. Bombers targeted airfields, while Bf-109s patrolled the skies, seeking out any RAF fighter that hesitated. The scene was chaotic. Smoke and fire from strafed hangars, ground crews rushing to refuel planes, pilots taking off with adrenaline and fear coursing through their veins. And then came the reports that made fighter commands sit up in alarm. Engine failures in combat were causing near misses with friendly aircraft. Some pilots collided mid-air while trying to compensate for sudden stalls. 3 Spitfires were lost in a single engagement, not to enemy fire but to their own Merlin engines. Commanders began calculating casualty projections. If this continued, hundreds of pilots could be lost before the Luftwaffe even attempted an invasion. B, hearing the reports, redoubled her efforts. The 50-cent washer, now installed in a few experimental Spitfires, was showing consistent results in engine test rigs. Data confirmed what she had suspected all along. The washer prevented fuel from siphoning backward under negative G maneuvers, maintaining constant pressure to the carburetor. By 1800 hours, as dusk began to settle over the English coastline, Fighter Command received urgent intelligence. Another wave of Bf-109s and bombers was inbound, this time targeting radar stations in southern England. Spitfires prepared to intercept, but for the first time, several aircraft were fitted with BA's washers. The stage was set for a real test under combat conditions. The tension in the air was palpable. Pilots knew the enemy was near. Mechanics and engineers prayed their work would hold. And somewhere in the workshops, B. Wallace, unnoticed and unheralded, waited to see whether a tiny, simple metal disc could truly make the difference between life and death for Britain's finest flyers. The Battle of Britain was looming. And the fate of thousands rested on the smallest detail, a washer worth 50 cents. By July 19, 1940, the Luftwaffe had intensified its assault on southern England. Intelligence reports warned of multiple waves converging over Kent and Sussex, each consisting of 200 to 300 bombers escorted by over 150 Bf-109s. RAF fighter command scrambled every available squadron. Pilots were exhausted from consecutive sorties, adrenaline and fear etched into their faces. On the morning of July 19, No. 92 Squadron took off from Biggin Hill just as dawn broke over the channel. The sea glimmered under a pale orange sky, a deceptive calm before the storm. Within 15 minutes, radar picked up incoming formations. By 09:30 hours, 12 Bf-109s were spotted approaching from the southeast at 18,000 feet. The dogfight erupted immediately. Spitfires and Bf-109s twisted and dived in a deadly aerial ballet. Guns spat fire, tracer rounds arcing through the sky. The deafening roar of engines filled every pilot's senses. Smoke from exploding bombs streaked across the horizon. Then it happened. Pilot Officer Harrington, diving aggressively to intercept a Messerschmitt, felt the familiar and terrifying shudder. His Merlin engine cut out completely. For a moment, the Spitfire lurched uncontrollably, the nose dropping sharply. Harrington struggled with the controls, trying to pull out before colliding with the cloud bank below. His heart raced. One wrong move and he would be just another casualty. Nearby, Flying Officer May experienced the same failure. Their aircraft were nearly 200 yards apart, both teetering on the edge of disaster. In a matter of seconds, two pilots were on the brink of death, not from enemy fire but from their own machines. The Luftwaffe pilots sensed weakness. Bf-109s pressed the attack. Their wings sliced through the air, guns blazing. Spitfires stalled mid-dive, engines coughing, leaving pilots vulnerable. Smoke and tracer rounds filled the sky, every second stretching into an eternity. Ground controllers at Biggin Hill watched in horror. Radio reports came in rapidly. Engine failures, near misses, and evasive maneuvers that barely kept pilots alive. 3 Spitfires were now lost in the opening minutes, forced to ditch in the channel. Commanders realized the crisis was worse than anticipated. The Spitfire's unmatched agility was being compromised by a microscopic flaw. Amid the chaos, morale faltered. Pilots felt a mixture of fear and frustration. One lieutenant radioed, "We're running blind out here. Engines cutting out mid-dive. This isn't combat, it's a lottery. We need a solution, fast." Meanwhile, in the workshops, B. Wallace received word that several of her experimental Merlin engines, fitted with the 50-cent washers, had been deployed. Engineers had no way of knowing if the modification would withstand real combat conditions. Every second felt like an eternity. By 10:30 hours, the Luftwaffe reached the outskirts of Canterbury. RAF squadrons engaged again, the skies a tangle of smoke, fire, and screaming engines. Pilots without the washers continued to experience engine failures, spiraling toward the earth in terror. Those fitted with BA's modification, however, noticed a remarkable difference. The Merlins held steady even in steep dives, allowing pilots to regain control, counterattack, and evade the Bf-109s. It was chaos versus order, failure versus innovation. Spitfires with the washer modification began to turn the tide in isolated skirmishes. Pilot testimonies later described it as miraculous. It was as if the aircraft came alive again, no hesitation, no coughing, just smooth power when I needed it most. The Luftwaffe, sensing increased resistance, intensified the assault. By 1100 hours, over 500 enemy aircraft were in the skies over southern England. Anti-aircraft guns rattled on the ground, adding to the deafening cacophony. Smoke and fire from strafed airfields created visual confusion for pilots, further testing their nerves and reflexes. Spitfire losses continued, but the washer-equipped aircraft managed to survive dives that would have previously been fatal. Engineers' gamble had paid off in part, but the battle was far from over. The skies remained a battlefield of nerves, courage, and split-second decisions. Every Spitfire pilot understood that their survival hinged not just on skill, but on a tiny piece of metal, BA's 50-cent washer. By noon, Fighter Command could see a glimmer of hope. Pilots who had previously struggled with fuel starvation were now maneuvering effectively against the Bf-109s. The Luftwaffe, unaware of the innovation, faced unexpectedly stiff resistance. Yet the battle was not yet won. For every pilot saved by the washer, another still faced engine failure, and the human cost continued to mount. What happened next would become legendary. A single, unassuming modification, designed by one woman far from the front lines, was about to prove that ingenuity, courage, and meticulous engineering could tip the balance in a battle that seemed hopeless. By late July 1940, the skies over southern England had become a proving ground not just for pilots, but for innovation under pressure. The Luftwaffe launched relentless waves of attacks, targeting airfields, radar stations, and shipping along the coast. Over 300 German aircraft were reported inbound at any given time. Fighter Command was stretched to its limits, and every surviving Spitfire was precious. It was during one particularly brutal engagement over Dover, around 1,430 hours on July 22, that the impact of Wallace's work became undeniable. No. 610 Squadron, flying Spitfires fitted with her washers, scrambled to intercept a formation of 16 Bf-109s and 12 Heinkel He-111 bombers approaching from the southeast. The pilots knew the stakes. Failure here could mean hundreds of civilian casualties along the coast and the loss of strategic radar installations vital for Britain's air defense. As the squadron climbed into position, pilots recalled past experiences. Engine stalls during dives had cost them dearly, and every maneuver had been a gamble. But this time, everything felt different. Flying Officer May, leading a section of 3 Spitfires, dived steeply to engage the Bf-109s. Engines that would have faltered held steady. The Spitfires responded instantly to throttle inputs, no sputtering, no hesitation. For the first time, RAF pilots felt true confidence in their aircraft. They could push to the limits, dive aggressively, and execute complex aerial maneuvers with full trust in their Merlins. In the ensuing dogfight, Spitfires began to outmaneuver the enemy, their agility and speed now fully exploited. Tracer fire streaked past, wings clipped dangerously close, but pilots now had the tools to fight back effectively. By 1445 hours, several Bf-109s were driven off, and 2 He-111s were shot down by concentrated gunfire. RAF losses were minimal compared to previous sorties. Squadron reports later noted that the engine performance of washer-equipped Spitfires allowed pilots to execute vertical dives, sudden climbs, and sharp turns without the fear of engine cutoff, a dramatic advantage over the Luftwaffe. Behind the scenes, BA's tiny washer was quietly being hailed as a hero in its own right. Mechanics and engineers began installing the modification across more aircraft. The discovery spread rapidly throughout Supermarine and the Air Ministry. It was astonishing in its simplicity. A small steel washer installed in the carburetor assembly prevented fuel from siphoning backward during negative G maneuvers, maintaining consistent fuel pressure to the Merlin engine. The impact was immediate. Over the next few days, RAF squadrons reported a dramatic reduction in engine stalls during combat. Pilots who had previously hesitated to dive or execute certain maneuvers began pushing their Spitfires to the absolute limit. Squadron intelligence noted a marked increase in enemy aircraft losses, a direct result of pilots now having the confidence to fully engage the Luftwaffe. The turning point was not just technological, it was psychological. Pilots felt empowered, knowing their aircraft would respond reliably under extreme stress. Commander-level decisions, which had previously been conservative to account for mechanical failure, now became bold. RAF pilots began taking the fight to the Luftwaffe over England, rather than merely reacting defensively. By 1500 hours, the impact was undeniable. A squadron that had previously lost multiple aircraft in a single engagement was now holding formation and even driving enemy fighters back. Reports from No. 92 and No. 610 squadrons described a newfound agility and effectiveness, and morale skyrocketed. Pilots began writing letters home, praising the Spitfire's performance and the tiny heroic modifications that had made such feats possible. It was here, in the crucible of combat, that Wallace's work proved its worth. A washer costing mere cents had transformed the RAF's frontline fighters, saving lives and altering the course of air engagements. Without it, countless sorties might have ended in disaster, and the Luftwaffe might have achieved air superiority during the critical weeks of the Battle of Britain. Against impossible odds, the innovation of a single individual had shifted the balance of power in the skies. The RAF was no longer reacting desperately, they were in control, and their confidence in their aircraft would define the next crucial months of the air war. By August 1940, the effects of Bf-109's simple but ingenious modification were being felt across the entire RAF. Spitfires, now reliably fitted with the 50-cent washers, no longer suffered fuel starvation in steep dives. Pilots could finally exploit the aircraft's full capabilities, superior maneuverability, rapid climbs, and deadly dives that left Bf-109 struggling to keep up. The once feared engine cutouts had become a relic of the past. The Battle of Britain intensified, with daily sorties across southern England. RAF squadrons, including No. 92, No. 610, and No. 54, engaged in relentless combat with the Luftwaffe. German intelligence, unaware of the technical improvement, reported increasing difficulty encountering Spitfires. Dogfights became more balanced, and in many cases the RAF began gaining the upper hand. Historians estimate that in the months following the washer's introduction, Spitfire squadrons saved over 2,100 pilots from otherwise fatal encounters caused by engine failures during dives. Pilots themselves recognized the change immediately. Squadron logs recorded countless instances of aircraft responding flawlessly under extreme G-forces, giving them the edge in life-or-death engagements. Flying Officer Harrington later recalled, "It sounds absurd, but a little washer changed everything. We could finally trust our planes completely. It wasn't just the aircraft, it was our lives. And that trust made all the difference." RAF losses, while still significant, decreased in proportion to enemy assaults, bolstering morale across fighter command. The Luftwaffe, expecting easy victories against faltering engines, found itself increasingly frustrated by Spitfires that could outmaneuver even experienced German pilots. The washer had quietly become a decisive factor in air superiority. Recognition of Bf-109's contribution, however, did not come immediately. In the male-dominated world of wartime aircraft engineering, her name was little known outside Supermarines workshops. Yet in 1941, as the significance of the washer became apparent, she received a commendation from the Air Ministry for her work in preventing catastrophic mechanical failures. The RAF, in turn, began implementing similar engineering solutions across all frontline fighters, cementing her innovation as standard practice. The legacy of that tiny washer extended far beyond its initial technical role. By allowing pilots to safely exploit the Spitfire's full potential, it contributed directly to the RAF's resilience during the Battle of Britain, arguably one of the most critical moments in World War II. It ensured that Britain maintained air superiority, thwarted Operation Sea Lion, and preserved the island nation as a base for Allied operations in Europe. Even today, aviation historians marvel at how one seemingly insignificant component, a 50-cent metal washer, could have such a profound impact on history. It is a testament not only to human ingenuity but also to the unsung heroes behind the front lines. Engineers, technicians, and visionaries who labored quietly to save lives. For the pilots who took to the skies, every successful dive, every evasion of enemy fire, and every victorious sortie was, in part, thanks to that washer. Over 2,100 lives were preserved, and the legacy of this unassuming invention became a symbol of the hidden ingenuity that often decides the course of war. The Battle of Britain would continue for months, but from July onward, the Spitfire, empowered by the washer, remained the unmatched defender of Britain's skies. Pilots could fight not just with courage but with confidence, and the air war over southern England was forever changed. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WW2 Dark Tales as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.